Hi, my name is Ollie, and I can't believe that I'm now 10 years post stroke. I had my stroke at 14 years old due to a brain hemorrhage, which was linked to a rare condition called arteriovenous malformation, or AVM. And this is where blood vessels that connect arteries and veins become tangled and eventually cause a rupture. Of course, I didn't know that I had an AVM on my brain until it ruptured when I was 14 and caused a brain hemorrhage. My consequent stroke resulted in me having to relearn to walk, talk, eat, and speak again. Since relearning all of those things, I now take medication for epilepsy, and my stroke also affected my vision. I don't have any left sided peripheral vision in either of my eyes. Because of this, when I was first back home, I bumped into things. I remember walking into a door frame once. I knocked over more than a few glasses. Now I'm not sure if my vision has improved or whether my brain has just got better at compensating, but I'm more than able to get around independently, and my vision loss doesn't really affect me now. I've always loved reading. It's a huge passion I have, and I feel it really helped me in my early recovery as I learned to compensate for my vision loss and sort of track each line I was on whilst I was reading. When I first started reading again, I used to lose which line I was on, but yeah, reading a lot I feel really helped to compensate and cope with my vision loss. I know I definitely became more careful when moving around because I knew that I had to be conscious of my environment, but that's become more automatic now, and so it's not as much as a problem for me. I'm making this video to share my experiences because at this time I'd only ever heard of, sort of older people having a stroke, and once I processed what had happened to me, I wondered why me for quite a long time, and was I the only person of my age who had experienced this and had a stroke? If I could give advice to anyone recovering from a stroke, I would say try not to base any expectations of your own recovery on anyone else's journey. You know, you're allowed time to process what happened to you. It's a huge deal, and everyone's recovery will be completely individual to them, and you will be on your own journey completely unique to you. It might seem strange to say, but I feel as though the easier part of my journey was whilst I was still in the hospital. I had a clear routine that worked well, and most decisions were made for me. It wasn't until I was discharged and back home that I realised the enormity of what had happened to me and what I'd been through, and how it affected my life, particularly socially. I worried whilst I was in hospital that my friends would have sort of forgotten about me and would have moved on without me. In fact, it was the complete opposite. My friends in my school did fundraising for children in need and raised money for Old Hay in Liverpool, where I had my life-saving surgery. My suggestion for schools is to keep in touch with young people who may be experiencing something like this, perhaps via their family, whilst they are recovering and aren't in school, just to let them know that their friends are thinking about them. At a time when I still had significant memory loss, I still remember my teacher visiting me in hospital. When I first went back to school, I started on a phased return to manage my fatigue, which is something that's really common after a stroke. Sometimes I push myself too much, and then I suffered the next day by not really being able to do too much. I had to learn to manage my own fatigue, as I found it really annoying to be told to rest when there was so much that I wanted to do, like be out with friends. Phased return to school or work is something that's really important to consider. I started out with sort of 1 hour a day and built that up gradually. It was important for me at that time just as much to have social time with friends as it was to be taking part in class and doing work. Starting back at school, I loved meeting friends for lunch, and liaising with school, I chose to take fewer GCSE subjects, which then enabled me to focus my energy and time to doing well in these rather than sort of spreading myself too thinly and taking on more than I would have been able to manage at the time. After my stroke, I did feel as though quite a lot of people looked at me as if I was sort of somewhat visibly wounded, and they saw me as my illness and experiences rather than who I actually was at the time. A lot of people didn't know how to respond to me whilst I was still in recovery, and it was hard losing some friends who walked away during this time. because they didn't know how to accommodate the new me. But my true friends were amazing at the time, and I really appreciated it when someone would just say, "Look, I haven't been through what you have, and I don't know how you feel, but I'm still here for you." It took me a while to realise that physical and emotional recovery have different timelines, and that's okay. In my early recovery, sort of short walks to the end of the road and back were all I could manage before I'd then have to rest for the day due to fatigue. As I built up my stamina, I could see progress in my physical recovery. At a much later point, my physiotherapists ended up taking me to the gym, and I found exercise in general just made me feel better emotionally. And years later, I now go running, which wasn't something I even did before my stroke. As I recovered, family and medical professionals expected me to feel negative or depressed after my stroke. In truth, I thought I was okay at the time. I told people I was okay with having a stroke and that it didn't really bother me. My words at the time were true. I went to CAMS for counselling, but looking back now, I realise that might not have been the best time for counselling, as I was still processing all of the trauma of having had a stroke. I hadn't yet processed everything that I'd been through since I'd become a teenager. It was about a year later when I first experienced anxiety and depression. Then I started to really analyse my feelings. I felt isolated from my friends and peers and felt that no one really understood my experiences because they hadn't been through everything that I had. Speaking to a teacher at school at this time helped me to recognise that I needed help, and I found that a good way to express this to my mum was to write it all down in a letter. My mum fully understood that I wanted to speak to someone to manage the trauma I had experienced, and she helped me to find a counsellor that I felt comfortable with. At that point, I realised that focusing on me was the most important thing, and that this wasn't selfish. I would say that it's important to know that there is no time limit or time frame on recovery from this type of trauma, and I would encourage anyone to speak to someone you feel comfortable with and for as long as you need. Counselling really helped me, and I still recognise that I benefit now from returning for more sessions, sort of as and when I need them. There was a time when therapy didn't really benefit me, and then there was a time where it was exactly what I needed. But don't put pressure on yourself. There will be a time when it is right for you to ask for more help, and there's no time constraint on this. I found that it was really important to have goals for your recovery, especially ones that you are emotionally invested in. Of course, they have to be realistic ones, especially in the early stages. Something I found useful was to work with my brain, as it was at the time. I found it useful to sort of think of my brain as being in a cast. Whilst I was recovering and healing, I found cognitive assessments underneath the hospital quite useful to devise studying strategies, as I recognised my best style of learning, and I found out I have a strong visual memory, so I use things like visual cue cards to study for exams. Although in early rehabilitation the focus is on mobility and sort of getting back to walking, I would want to make it very clear that the more you heal emotionally, the more you can then focus on and build on physical recovery. 10 years later, I'm now planning to study creative writing and theatre at university, and I'm really looking forward to it. An aspect that really helped me recover was finding things that I'm good at and passionate about. I started a YouTube channel called Your Favourite Bibliophile, where I review my favourite books. Please check out the channel, hit subscribe, and hopefully you can find your next favourite book. I hope this all helps someone who may have had similar experiences, and their families too. I also want to mention that although my sessions are now sort of few and far between, I am still in therapy, and it's still something that I utilise. I'm aware that now I will be in lifelong recovery, but I don't see that as a bad thing. I feel that that means I've now got an infinite opportunity to get even better than I am now.